Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I thought I would make a video talking about why I left teaching, and so this is called Memoirs of an ex-games development teacher in the UK. So I thought I'd start with a little bit about me and my background. In 2015, I released this computer game on Steam, which I built in my bedroom, basically. And that was all good fun. And then I started making a second computer game called Hyperflight, which was a sci-fi flight sim racing game type thing. And it occurs to me my face is filling half the screen right now, so that's not ideal, but anyway. You sort of get the idea. As I was building this game, I got an email from a local college to come in and talk about teaching games development. So I did that, and I started as a lecturer / tutor for games development for level 2 and level 3 courses. Basically school leavers, I believe the Americans would call it 6th grade. Over here it's like year 12 and year 13. So to cut a long story short, I went from teaching to 4 years later running a games development course. There we go, that's better. For a different college. And I was basically the course manager and the lecturer for all of the games development lessons at the college there. So I have a number of reasons why I left education, and I'm going to go through them one by one in order. So reason number one was dishonesty, the lies. So this was really the core reason why I left. So what am I talking about? Well, we are telling students that they're on a full-time course in games design, but the reality, in my view, is a lie. The course structure allocated 10.5 hours of project time a week. Now, when I was at college, I was there like 9 till 4, 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. That was full time. And I think generally 35 hours is considered full time. However, if we look on the government website, it says here that a part-time worker is someone who works fewer than a full-time worker, but there is no specific number of hours that makes someone full or part-time. So it's a kind of a convenient wordplay that we can say, oh, you're on a full-time course, when we're actually only offering them 10.5 hours. So I ask you, in what world is a 10.5 hour work week considered full-time? In the real world, a full-time job is like 40 hours, really, 35 at a push. And our students weren't even getting 1/3 of that time. And the situation was made even more frustrating by the college's insistence that we book our students onto numerous extra sessions, from student services sessions to career workshops, NGO initiatives like Gambling Aware, or I shit you not, the local police coming in to give talks about road safety, to 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And so all of this, while admittedly not entirely useless, sometimes quite good, this was eating into the already minimal project time that the students have for their projects to do the thing that they actually came to do. And so we were essentially selling them a fantasy. They were paying top whack for an insufficient service. And I didn't want to be part of it anymore. I grew tired of defending what little time the students had to do the thing that they came to the college to actually do, which in my case was building computer games. So one of many dishonest policies that I could put my finger on. But let's move on to reason number 2. Actually, I'm not moving on to reason number 2. Sorry, I've got another slide about reason number 1, so let's carry on. It turns out I am going to give more examples about lies. So I heard on the radio today that GCSE exam results had dropped again. And this is because students are not being properly educated. And this is because the education system in the UK sucks. All right, I'm not involved in it anymore, so I can say that. Then we immediately heard from some politician on the radio that actually there's a lot of variance in the results across the country, and if you look at this particular region of the country, then exam results have actually gone up, and it's just total and utter bold-faced dishonesty, and it's broadcast on terrestrial radio all across the country. And what kind of hypnosis are they attempting on us? Seriously, oh, look, if you look at this tiny part of the graph, then come off it. You've got a problem. And if you refuse to acknowledge that you've got a problem, then you won't even begin to look into fixing it. So there's a reason why education in this country sucks. The educational institutions do whatever the government tells them to, basically, because that's how they make money. And the government is both unwilling and unable to improve education in this country. It's like the blind are leading the blind. And it's worse than that. It's more like lying, crooked people who are pretending to be blind are leading the blind. And really the whole thing is... it creates this kind of bubble of false economy, which is something that perhaps I should talk about in another video. But this time I really am moving on to reason number 2. Reason number 2 I've entitled, I'm sorry, what is my job again? So the second major factor was the workload, the unfair workload that's placed on the shoulders of teaching. Now, I don't want this to be like a moan of oh, they give me too much to do or whatever. And I want to explain this well. So here's my attempt at that. So with 21 hours of teaching project work across a week, okay, I'm teaching across 2 different year groups, as well as things like tutorial time and EEP hours in the classroom, which is some government incentive thing. My time is already, let's say, at a premium. And the reality was that if I'd dedicated the same amount of time prepping as I did for teaching, I would have been working over my 40 contracted hours before even thinking about anything else. Okay, so maybe some teachers think that that's, that would be too much prep time. But in my mind, an equal amount of prep time to delivered teaching time, if you did that, you'd be delivering very good quality sessions, in my view. So, I wanted to spend my time giving valuable, considered, well thought out feedback on student projects. I wanted to spend time creating valuable learning resources and staying up to date with current technologies, as is essential in the games development world. But the college's other demands made this practically impossible. As a study program manager, I was the one who had to write the entire curriculum across, in accordance with this crazy making grading criteria from the examining body. I had to create all the assignment briefs and map out the entire year's scheme of work, and that means creating lesson plans for every single session and justifying their educational effectiveness across a range of different prescribed criteria. And it was as if people thought I was just standing around not doing anything all day, despite the fact that I was mostly in the classroom. I was also responsible for what I would call an endless stream of administrative tasks, such as things like student reports, one-on-one meetings, daily phone calls to parents about student absences. And my email box just became this source of constant anxiety, with just tens of thousands of messages piling up into this giant sort of heap of chaos, and many of them requiring action and immediate action as well. So, this was always, you couldn't just focus on teaching in a classroom. You always had like your mind kind of half occupied on all this other stuff that's coming in from elsewhere. So, on top of this, I was expected to function as a sort of unofficial marketing and industry liaison, attending after-hours events at schools and things to advertise the course, networking with local businesses, basically to tick boxes for government schemes regarding industry relevance and stuff like that. And don't get me started on the work experience program. I mean, Christ, like all I'll say about that was that it was cutting further into project time and disrupting the scheme of work that I'd already planned out. So the job became this kind of all-consuming myriad of duties that left me in a kind of perpetual state of spinning plates. I was reaching levels of efficiency and productivity I never imagined possible out of myself, so I suppose that's a positive. But I was just constantly left feeling like whatever I did was never enough. And that was a feeling that grew into a major reason for my departure. So that's number 2. Reason number... oh no, hang on, we're still on number 2. I'm sorry, I've made more slides than I thought I had. So I'm not done yet, even. I'm not done. And I know this bit sounds like a bit of a moan, but, here we go. So what made the job even more frustrating was the chaos of a dysfunctional administrative system. Now, don't get me wrong, the admin staff that were there were excellent, and just a real godsend, but massive layoffs meant that many of the admin duties had to be offloaded onto the teachers, creating a situation where teachers are sort of randomly taken aside and reprimanded for not doing tasks that we were never told to do, or for dropping the ball on something that we were never informed was our responsibility, or just given like unreasonably large tasks like collecting GCSE results from second years, because their grades at entry, which they gave as first years, had probably been lost or something like that. But nobody would admit this or apologize or tell us a reason why. They would just say, okay, today you've got to do this, And ultimately the workload it didn't just drain my time and like negatively affect the quality of my teaching. It also interfered, sadly, with my ability to just function properly as a person. The stress was just getting me down, and it got to a point where I just didn't have a social life, and I just didn't know who I was anymore, because all of the stuff that was going on was just all consuming. So I had no time or headspace to do anything for myself or do anything creative, or to make friends or anything like that. So to cut a long story short, or have I even cut it short, in the end, I wasn't able to be the kind of teacher that I wanted to be. I was so busy with everything other than teaching the students that the core act of teaching became secondary, tertiary, more like an afterthought. A small and ever diminishing part of my role as a program manager. So let's move on. Reason number 3. Reason number 3 was being ignored. So every morning we would have meetings, and sometimes we would have these so-called cascade meetings where basically upper management would dump responsibilities and announcements on people below them, and then they would dump these things on people below them, and shit would roll downhill like it does in most jobs. And eventually these responsibilities and announcements would get dumped on us teachers without really giving us much of a chance to speak. So these meetings often ran over, making us late for our first classes, which would just basically shatter any mental preparations that we might have needed to make for the day. And when I did get a word in, even simple requests were simply brushed off or denied. My classroom relocated to a long neglected part of the building, and it had a carpet so filthy that on a hot day you could smell it. It stank. And when visitors and parents came into my classroom, I would cringe. It was embarrassing. And my pleas to have the carpet cleaned were ignored and ignored and ignored, and then flatly rejected. And what's worse was that my department budget was pretty farcical. Requests to buy materials for my students were often denied or buried under red tape. And yet, at the end of the year, I was pressured to spend every last penny to avoid a cut the next year. So then I'd spend hours crafting these purchase orders, only for them to be ignored again. And this all happened sort of with my time already stretched as thinly as it was. And this wasn't just frustrating. This kind of thing was crazy making. It was maddening. So reason number 4 was the indoctrination. Now, I have to be quite careful about how I word this because I live in the UK, and as the Americans have figured out, we don't have a scenario that is conducive to free speech over here at the moment. So I'm going to have to be slightly vague, but needless to say, there are certain pervasive ideologies in the UK education system which I felt were basically pushing me out. It left me feeling conflicted and isolated. The sector's near uniform political slant in a particular direction does not encourage a diversity of opinion. In fact, I would describe it more as a veritable echo chamber of one-sided views. An echo chamber in which dissent against doctrine was not tolerated, and so the lines between education and indoctrination began to blur, especially around things like religion, religious homogeneity, sexuality, homosexuality, and of course things like the trans ideology. And this, for me, it gets very personal, and requires a little background from myself. My recently deceased mother, God rest her soul, suffered from schizophrenia and a very rare mental condition called the Capgras delusion. She would often have delusions relating to her own identity and to the identity of others. And whenever this happened, I would correct her and attempt to ground her back into reality, as with the rest of my family. And we did this out of love for her, because I am her son and she is my mother and I love her. And so with this background, I was not necessarily comfortable going along with every student's delusion regarding their own identity, but instead I was expected to validate and affirm my students' reconstructed identities every single time, in every case, without question. And to be completely honest, to me, affirming a student's ego like this felt like I was upholding delusion. It felt like I was telling lies, and it conflicted with my conscience and with my moral values. And it felt, frankly, like it was costing me part of my soul. And yet, the leftist position brands this kind of discomfort as bigotry. I am not allowed to feel uncomfortable with this. In fact, not being comfortable with this makes me a bad person in their view. And I didn't know to what extent the people around me were in on this or not. It was like invasion of the body snatchers. I had to watch my tongue and censor my opinions as if the walls had ears, because of the ever-present threat of social exile, reprimand, dismissal, or even a non-crime hate incident being written up on my personal permanent criminal record, like a sort of scarlet letter around my neck. And this would make a future DBS check likely to fail, which I would need if ever I hope to work in education again. And so, without going too far into this and like burning any bridges, I would simply ask my fellow teachers, do you know the difference between education and indoctrination? Both of these are teachings. Both of these are taught. But are you aware that one of these teachings represents your academic purpose, where the other represents an academic sin? There is a simple test for this. Ask yourself, what are your students able to do that they were not able to do before your teaching? And if you can't think of an answer, it's likely that your teaching was an indoctrination rather than education. I shall leave it there. Reason number 5 was Ofsted. Finally, Ofsted came along and put a nail in the coffin for me. Now, I will spare you the rehashing of the usual gripes about Ofsted, of which there are many and you may have heard before. Things like the box ticking and the grandstanding and the virtue signalling and the frantic inspection paranoia. No, okay. What really crushed me in the end was our college, riddled with all the dysfunctions that I have described, receiving an outstanding rating. This is the Department for Education's Gold Star in the UK, affirming essentially a broken process, dismissed voices, dishonesty, and morally questionable practices. If this is the best we've got to offer in the UK, what hope is there ever for change? Let's just say that Ofsted's verdict cemented my decision to leave. Okay, so is this the end? There isn't really a picture for this. It's just like a brick wall. But, you know, make of that what you will. Is this the end? Well, no. Should you consider teaching? Well, despite all that I have said here, if you are even remotely interested in becoming a teacher, then I think you should definitely give it a go. Why? Well, because the education sector needs good people like you. It needs honest, smart, noble, brave, caring, and compassionate people. It needs skilled, talented, and intelligent people. Basically, it needs more good people. And the stakes are high. You know, the future of our civilization, the future of our civilization is literally at stake with this. And it's simple cause and effect. Yeah, cause and effect. If we fail the youth in education, we will end up with a nightmare of a country. But teaching them well will result in a generation that will fix the problems that we face right now and make this country a pleasant and appealing and beautiful place to be. So it really is as simple as that. Now, is it easy? No, but it is simple. So if you've made it this far, thank you for listening to me ramble on about this. If you have anything to say, I'm sure you will leave a comment below. If you have a nice thing to say, then please do leave a comment, because you know people with nasty things to say won't hesitate. Thanks again, and I will see you on the next one. Goodbye.